The tension in the courtyard reached a breaking point as General Mitchell waited for McKenna's response to his increasingly forceful demands. The silence stretched beyond comfortable limits, creating an atmosphere where every second seemed to carry weight that would influence the eventual resolution of the confrontation. McKenna remained perfectly still, his training asserting itself over the natural human impulse to respond to direct challenges from authority figures. Captain Williams recognized that intervention could no longer be delayed. The situation had escalated beyond what could be resolved through McKenna's continued adherence to ceremonial protocol alone. Stepping forward with measured precision, the captain positioned himself at appropriate distance from both McKenna and General Mitchell, his bearing reflecting respect for all parties while asserting his authority over the situation. "General Mitchell," Captain Williams began, his voice carrying the professional courtesy appropriate for addressing a high-ranking Allied officer. "I am Captain Williams, commanding officer for the ceremonial guards on duty today. I believe there may be some confusion about our protocols that I can help clarify." The intervention provided immediate relief from the direct confrontation between McKenna and the general, while maintaining diplomatic respect for the visiting dignitary. Captain Williams' approach demonstrated the careful balance required when addressing conflicts between different military hierarchies during international diplomatic events. General Mitchell turned his attention to the captain, his expression reflecting frustration with what he perceived as unnecessary complications to his simple request. His military background had conditioned him to expect clarity and efficiency in all interactions with subordinate personnel, regardless of nationality or specific unit affiliation. "Captain, your soldier here has failed to comply with direct orders from a superior officer," the general stated firmly. "I requested a routine inspection of his weapon and equipment, which is standard procedure in any professional military organization. His failure to respond suggests serious deficiencies in training and discipline." The accusation carried implications that extended far beyond the immediate incident. Questions about training and discipline reflected on the entire unit and potentially on British military standards more broadly. Captain Williams understood that his response would need to address these concerns while maintaining appropriate respect for his personnel and their adherence to proper protocols. "General, I appreciate your interest in our procedures," Captain Williams replied diplomatically. "However, our ceremonial guards operate under specific protocols established for the protection of royal residences. Guardsman McKenna is following his orders by maintaining his assigned position and bearing until properly relieved by appropriate authority." The explanation attempted to clarify the situation without suggesting criticism of the general's initial request. Captain Williams' diplomatic language acknowledged the general's authority while asserting the independent nature of British military protocols and the validity of McKenna's response to the confrontation. General Mitchell's expression revealed his surprise at this explanation. His extensive military experience had not included detailed familiarity with the ceremonial duties of royal guards, and the concept of soldiers operating under protocols that superseded traditional military hierarchy presented an unexpected complication to his understanding of the situation. "Are you telling me that your soldiers are authorized to ignore orders from Allied officers?" the general asked, his tone suggesting incredulity at what seemed to be a breakdown in military discipline and cooperation. That hardly seems consistent with proper military professionalism or alliance protocols. The question highlighted the fundamental misunderstanding that had created the confrontation. General Mitchell's perspective reflected normal military hierarchy, where rank determined authority regardless of other considerations. The ceremonial context and specific responsibilities of royal guards created a different framework that his experience had not prepared him to navigate. Captain Williams recognized the need for more detailed explanation while maintaining diplomatic sensitivity. The general's question deserved a thoughtful response that acknowledged his perspective while clarifying the unique aspects of ceremonial guard duties and the protocols governing interactions with visiting dignitaries. "General, the Queen's Guards serve dual functions as both ceremonial personnel and active security forces," the captain explained carefully. "Their protocols prioritize the protection of royal residences and the maintenance of proper ceremonial procedures. These responsibilities supersede other considerations, including requests from visiting officials, regardless of rank. The explanation provided context that General Mitchell had not previously understood. His assumption that normal military hierarchy would apply in all circumstances had not accounted for the specialized nature of ceremonial duties and the specific legal and regulatory frameworks governing the protection of royal properties. Palace officials who had been observing the confrontation began to approach the group, their movement suggesting recognition that diplomatic intervention might be necessary to prevent further escalation. The participation of palace authorities would add another dimension to the situation while potentially providing additional clarity about protocols and expectations. Lord Pemberton, the senior palace official responsible for coordinating the visit, stepped forward with the measured dignity appropriate for such circumstances. His role required balancing respect for visiting dignitaries with protection of palace personnel and procedures, making his intervention both necessary and delicate. General Mitchell, Lord Pemberton began with formal courtesy. Please allow me to apologize for any confusion about our ceremonial procedures. Perhaps I can provide some clarification that will help resolve this misunderstanding. The diplomatic intervention acknowledged the general's concerns while providing an opportunity for explanation without implying criticism of anyone's actions. Lord Pemberton's approach reflected years of experience managing similar situations where different expectations and protocols created potential for conflict. General Mitchell turned his attention to the palace official, his expression suggesting willingness to hear explanations while maintaining his position that proper military courtesy had not been observed. His military background made him naturally receptive to authority figures who could provide clarity about operational procedures and expectations. Lord Pemberton, I appreciate your intervention, the general replied. However, I remain concerned about what appears to be a fundamental breakdown in military discipline and courtesy. Professional soldiers should respond appropriately to legitimate requests from allied officers, regardless of ceremonial considerations. The general's persistence reflected his genuine belief that important principles were at stake. His military experience had taught him that discipline and respect for authority formed the foundation of effective military organizations, and he viewed McKenna's silence as potentially dangerous precedent for future interactions. Lord Pemberton nodded understanding before beginning his explanation. His diplomatic experience had prepared him for situations where different cultural and organizational expectations created potential for serious misunderstandings that could affect international relationships if not handled carefully. General, the Queen's Guards operate under parliamentary authority that dates back several centuries, Lord Pemberton explained. Their primary obligation is to the Crown and to the specific protocols established for the protection of royal persons and properties. These obligations supersede all other considerations, including requests from visiting officials. The historical context provided perspective that General Mitchell had not previously considered. The ancient traditions and legal frameworks governing royal protection created authority structures that existed independently of normal military hierarchy, making McKenna's response legally appropriate rather than insubordinate. Captain Williams observed the general's reaction carefully, noting signs of understanding beginning to replace frustration as the unique aspects of the situation became clearer. The explanation was providing context that made McKenna's behavior comprehensible within the proper framework rather than appearing as simple defiance of authority. Are you suggesting that these guards operate outside normal military command structure? General Mitchell asked, his tone indicating genuine curiosity rather than continued frustration. His professional interest in organizational structure made him want to understand how such a system could function effectively. Not outside military structure, but under specialized authority, Lord Pemberton clarified. The guards are active military personnel who serve under normal command hierarchy for most purposes. However, when performing ceremonial duties at royal residences, they operate under additional protocols that take precedence over other considerations. The distinction helped clarify the complex dual nature of the Guard's responsibilities. General Mitchell's military background made him appreciate the challenges of managing personnel who served multiple functions requiring different protocols and priorities depending on circumstances and location. McKenna remained at attention throughout the discussion, maintaining his ceremonial bearing while listening to the explanation of the principles that governed his actions. His continued composure demonstrated the effectiveness of his training and his understanding of his responsibilities regardless of external pressures. American delegation members who had witnessed the confrontation appeared relieved as the explanation provided context that made the incident comprehensible rather than merely frustrating. Their diplomatic experience suggested that cultural misunderstandings were common during international visits and could usually be resolved through patient explanation and goodwill. British officials observed the general's reaction with careful attention, recognizing that his acceptance of the explanation would determine whether the incident created lasting complications for the diplomatic visit. The successful resolution of the confrontation would demonstrate the effectiveness of established protocols for managing such situations. "I begin to understand," General Mitchell said thoughtfully. "This is similar to our own ceremonial units that operate under specialized protocols for specific occasions. The difference is that your guards maintain these protocols continuously rather than only during formal ceremonies." The comparison to American ceremonial units provided a framework that General Mitchell could relate to his own experience. His recognition of similar principles in different contexts suggested that his initial frustration had resulted from unfamiliarity rather than fundamental disagreement with the underlying concepts. Captain Williams felt relief as the explanation appeared to be succeeding in resolving the confrontation without diplomatic complications or criticism of his guardsmen's conduct. McKenna's adherence to proper protocol had been vindicated, and the general's concerns had been addressed through patient explanation rather than confrontation. Lord Pemberton continued his explanation, providing additional context about the historical development of Royal Guard protocols and their evolution over centuries of changing political and military circumstances. The historical perspective helped illustrate how current procedures reflected accumulated wisdom about balancing ceremonial dignity with practical security requirements. The protocols that Guardsman McKenna was following have protected royal residences through wars, political upheavals, and countless diplomatic visits, Lord Pemberton explained. Their effectiveness depends on consistent application regardless of circumstances or external pressures. The historical context provided powerful justification for McKenna's actions while acknowledging the legitimacy of General Mitchell's initial expectations. The explanation demonstrated how apparent conflicts could be resolved through understanding rather than requiring anyone to abandon their principles or procedures. General Mitchell nodded slowly, his expression reflecting recognition that his initial assessment had been based on incomplete understanding of the situation. His military professionalism made him appreciate the importance of maintaining effective protocols even when they created temporary misunderstandings with visiting officials. "I apologize for my frustration," the general said, addressing both Captain Williams and McKenna directly. "Your guardsman was following proper procedures, and my lack of familiarity with your protocols created unnecessary tension. This has been an educational experience about the complexity of ceremonial duties." The apology provided dignified resolution to the confrontation while acknowledging the validity of different approaches to similar challenges. General Mitchell's professional grace in accepting the explanation demonstrated the diplomatic skills that had contributed to his successful military career. McKenna remained at attention, but those observing carefully could detect subtle signs of relief as the confrontation resolved without requiring him to compromise his adherence to proper protocols. His handling of the situation would be remembered as an example of effective training and commitment to duty under extraordinary pressure. The incident became a defining moment of the visit, illustrating how apparent conflicts could be resolved through patient explanation and mutual respect. The confrontation that had threatened diplomatic complications instead became an opportunity for increased understanding between allied military organizations operating under different traditions and protocols. As the autumn sun continued its journey across the ancient stones of Windsor Castle, the successful resolution of the confrontation provided renewed foundation for productive diplomatic engagement between the British and American delegations, with enhanced appreciation for the complexity and dignity of the traditions that governed their respective military organizations. The afternoon portion of the visit began with General Mitchell's delegation moving toward the East Terrace, where a series of presentations had been arranged to showcase various aspects of British military heritage and current operational capabilities. McKenna remained at his designated position, maintaining the steady vigilance that had become second nature during his years of service with the Coldstream Guards. The general's fascination with military protocols had become increasingly apparent throughout the day. During brief pauses in the formal proceedings, he had engaged palace staff and military escorts in detailed discussions about operational procedures, security arrangements, and the specific roles of different personnel involved in protecting royal residences. Captain Williams approached McKenna's position during a brief lull in the scheduled activities. The captain's expression remained professionally neutral, but McKenna detected subtle signs of increased attention to detail that suggested heightened awareness of the visiting delegation's behavior and interests. Maintain standard protocol regardless of any unusual requests or questions, Captain Williams instructed quietly. Remember that our primary responsibility is to the Crown and to the maintenance of proper ceremonial procedures. Any deviation from established protocol must be approved through appropriate channels. McKenna acknowledged the instruction with an almost imperceptible nod, understanding that his captain was reinforcing fundamental principles that governed all aspects of guard duty. The reminder suggested that unusual situations might arise requiring strict adherence to training and regulations rather than accommodation of requests from visiting officials. The American delegation reconvened following their brief tour of the castle's historical collections, with General Mitchell appearing particularly engaged by explanations of military traditions spanning several centuries. His questions had demonstrated impressive knowledge of military history and genuine interest in understanding how historical precedents influenced current practices. As the group moved through the East Terrace, McKenna observed the general's continued attention to operational details rather than purely ceremonial aspects of the royal residence. The general's military background clearly influenced his perspective, making him naturally curious about practical matters of security, organization, and efficiency. The afternoon sun created dramatic lighting across the ancient stonework, highlighting the grandeur that had impressed countless visitors over the centuries. The setting provided an appropriate backdrop for discussions about military heritage and the evolution of ceremonial traditions that continued to serve important diplomatic and cultural functions. Palace photographers documented various moments throughout the visit, capturing images that would preserve the historical record of this diplomatic exchange. The photographs would eventually find their way into official archives, military museums, and publications celebrating Anglo-American cooperation and friendship. General Mitchell's colleagues from the Pentagon seemed equally impressed by the professionalism displayed by all personnel involved in the visit. Their conversations with British military officials had covered topics ranging from joint training exercises to shared strategic objectives in various regions of the world where both nations maintained active involvement. The diplomatic success of such visits often depended on countless small interactions that built trust and understanding between individuals who would later be responsible for implementing agreements and coordinating activities between their respective organizations. The personal relationships formed during these occasions frequently proved as valuable as the formal agreements documented in official reports. As the delegation prepared for the next scheduled presentation, McKenna noticed General Mitchell's attention once again focusing on his position. This time, however, the general's interest seemed more than casual observation. The intensity of his gaze suggested that he was contemplating something specific about the ceremonial guard procedures he had been observing throughout the day. The general separated from the main group and began walking directly toward McKenna's position. His approach was deliberate and purposeful, suggesting that he intended to engage in some form of interaction rather than simply pass by on his way to another location. McKenna maintained his ceremonial stance while tracking the general's movement through his peripheral vision. Several members of the American delegation noticed their leader's departure from the scheduled activities and began following at a discreet distance. British officials also became aware of the general's independent movement, with subtle adjustments in their positioning suggesting increased attention to the developing situation. General Mitchell stopped directly in front of McKenna, positioning himself close enough for normal conversation, but clearly expecting some form of acknowledgement or response from the ceremonial guard. His bearing conveyed the authority of someone accustomed to immediate attention and compliance with his expectations. "Soldier," the general began, his voice carrying the command presence developed through decades of military leadership. "I'd like to examine your weapon and equipment. Please present arms for inspection." The request created an immediate tension that McKenna felt throughout his body. His training had covered countless scenarios, but this particular situation presented a complex challenge requiring careful consideration of multiple factors. The general's request fell outside standard protocol for ceremonial duties, yet came from a high-ranking Allied military officer during an official diplomatic visit. McKenna remained motionless, his eyes fixed straight ahead according to regulations governing ceremonial guard duties. The silence stretched for several seconds as he processed the implications of various possible responses to the general's request. His training emphasized the importance of maintaining proper protocols while showing appropriate respect for visiting dignitaries. "Did you hear me, soldier?" General Mitchell's voice carried increased authority and a hint of impatience. "I am a 4-star general in the United States Army, and I am ordering you to present arms for inspection." The raised voice attracted the attention of palace staff and security personnel positioned throughout the area. Captain Williams began moving toward the developing confrontation, his pace suggesting urgency without appearing to rush. Other members of both delegations also became aware that something unusual was occurring. McKenna's mind raced through his training and regulations, seeking guidance for this unprecedented situation. The Coldstream Guards operated under strict protocols that governed their interactions with all individuals, regardless of rank or status. His ceremonial duties required him to remain at attention unless properly relieved by his commanding officer or authorized palace officials. The general's expectation of immediate compliance reflected his experience in environments where his authority was unquestioned and his orders were executed without delay. However, the ceremonial context and foreign setting created complications that his normal military experience had not prepared him to navigate effectively. "I understand you may not be familiar with proper military courtesy," the general continued, his tone becoming more forceful. "When a superior officer gives you a direct order, the appropriate response is immediate compliance, not standing there like a statue." McKenna could feel the weight of attention from everyone within hearing distance. The situation had escalated beyond a simple misunderstanding into something that could potentially create diplomatic complications if not handled carefully. His response would be observed and evaluated by officials from both nations who understood the delicate balance required in such circumstances. Captain Williams arrived within normal conversational distance, but maintained respectful separation, allowing the situation to develop while remaining ready to intervene if necessary. His presence provided McKenna with the assurance that appropriate authority was nearby, but also placed additional responsibility on the young guardsman to handle the immediate confrontation properly. The general's frustration became more apparent as seconds passed without the compliance he expected. His military background had conditioned him to expect immediate response to direct orders, and the apparent defiance from a lower-ranking soldier challenged his understanding of proper military behavior and protocol. "This is your final warning, soldier," General Mitchell stated firmly. "Present arms for inspection immediately, or you will face consequences for insubordination and failure to follow direct orders from a superior officer." The threat carried implications that extended far beyond the immediate confrontation. McKenna understood that his response would be scrutinized not only by those present, but potentially by investigators and officials who would later review the incident. His handling of the situation would reflect on his unit, his training, and the broader reputation of British military professionalism. Palace security personnel positioned themselves strategically around the area, maintaining discreet presence while remaining ready to respond if the situation deteriorated further. Their training covered protocols for managing conflicts involving visiting dignitaries, but the specific circumstances of this confrontation presented unique challenges requiring careful judgment. McKenna's breathing remained steady as he continued processing options and implications. His training had emphasized the importance of maintaining composure under pressure while adhering to established protocols regardless of external pressures or demands. The current situation represented the ultimate test of those principles. The American delegation members who had followed General Mitchell appeared increasingly uncomfortable with the developing confrontation. Their understanding of diplomatic protocol suggested that the situation was moving beyond appropriate boundaries for interactions with host nation personnel during official visits. British officials observing the incident maintained their professional composure while clearly recognizing the potential for serious diplomatic complications. The delicate balance between showing respect for visiting dignitaries and maintaining sovereignty over their own personnel and procedures required careful navigation. "I can see that you lack proper military discipline and training," General Mitchell declared, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "Perhaps your officers need to teach you about appropriate respect for senior military leadership from allied nations." The public nature of the criticism added another dimension to the confrontation. McKenna's response would be witnessed by numerous individuals whose accounts would shape the historical record of the incident. The pressure to respond in a way that satisfied multiple constituencies while maintaining personal and professional integrity continued to intensify. Captain Williams stepped forward, his movement indicating readiness to address the situation directly if McKenna's continued silence was not sufficient to resolve the developing crisis. The captain's intervention would provide relief from the immediate pressure, but might also suggest that the ceremonial guard had been unable to handle the situation independently. The autumn afternoon that had begun with such promise for successful diplomatic engagement had transformed into a test of competing authorities and conflicting expectations. The resolution of the confrontation would depend on careful application of military protocols, diplomatic sensitivity, and individual judgment under extraordinary pressure. General Mitchell's expectation of compliance reflected his extensive experience in military hierarchies where rank determined authority regardless of other considerations. However, the ceremonial context and the specific responsibilities of royal guards created a situation where traditional military hierarchy intersected with other forms of authority and obligation. McKenna's continued silence began to attract attention from additional personnel throughout the castle grounds. Word of the confrontation spread quietly among staff members and security personnel, creating broader awareness of the developing situation and its potential implications for the success of the diplomatic visit. The weight of tradition and protocol pressed down on McKenna as he considered his options. The Queen's Guards had maintained their ceremonial duties through centuries of changing political circumstances, foreign invasions, and diplomatic crises. His individual response would become part of that historical continuum. The general's authority derived from his position within the American military hierarchy and his status as an official representative of an allied nation. However, that authority did not automatically extend to personnel serving under different command structures and operating according to different regulatory frameworks. McKenna's training had prepared him for many challenging situations, but the specific combination of factors present in this confrontation created unique pressures requiring careful application of principles rather than reliance on specific procedural guidance. His response would demonstrate the effectiveness of that training and his understanding of his fundamental responsibilities. The diplomatic implications of the confrontation continued to expand as more personnel became aware of the situation. The successful resolution of the conflict would require balancing respect for visiting dignitaries with maintenance of appropriate sovereignty and independence in managing internal military affairs and ceremonial procedures. As tension continued to build in the ancient courtyard of Windsor Castle, the stage was set for a resolution that would test the principles of military discipline, diplomatic protocol, and individual courage under extraordinary pressure. The outcome would be remembered as a defining moment in the relationship between two allied nations and their military traditions. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Windsor Castle as Guardsman Thomas McKenna adjusted his red tunic one final time. At 26 years old, he had been standing sentry at various royal residences for 3 years, but this assignment felt different. Today marked the beginning of a state visit that would test every protocol he had memorized and every instinct he had developed during his service with the Coldstream Guards. McKenna's boots clicked against the ancient stones as he took his position at the entrance to the castle's main courtyard. The ceremony scheduled for this morning would welcome General Harrison Mitchell, a four-star general from the United States Army, along with a delegation of American military officials. The visit had been planned for months, with every detail scrutinized by palace security, diplomatic staff, and military liaison officers from both nations. Standing at attention, McKenna felt the familiar weight of his bearskin hat and the ceremonial rifle at his side. His instructions had been crystal clear during the briefing the previous evening. Captain Williams, his commanding officer, had emphasized the importance of maintaining absolute protocol regardless of the circumstances. The Queen's Guards were not merely decorative soldiers in elaborate uniforms. They were active-duty military personnel responsible for the security and dignity of the royal family and their residences. The first signs of the approaching delegation appeared as a convoy of black vehicles wound through the castle grounds. McKenna remained motionless, his eyes fixed straight ahead, but his peripheral vision tracked the movement of security personnel and palace staff preparing for the formal reception. The autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves and the distant sound of military bands warming up for the ceremonial welcome. General Mitchell emerged from the lead vehicle with the bearing of a man accustomed to command. At 58, he had built a distinguished career spanning 4 decades of military service, including combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, strategic positions at the Pentagon, and leadership roles in NATO operations. His chest displayed ribbons representing numerous commendations, and his reputation for demanding excellence from subordinates was well known throughout military circles. The general's entourage included several colonels, a handful of Pentagon officials, and diplomatic personnel from the American embassy. They moved with purpose toward the castle entrance, where various British officials waited to begin the formal welcome ceremony. The choreography had been rehearsed multiple times, with each participant understanding their role in the diplomatic ballet about to unfold. McKenna watched as the delegation approached his position. Protocol dictated that he remain at attention, acknowledging no one unless specifically addressed by appropriate authority. His role was to represent the unwavering dedication of the Queen's Guards, maintaining dignity and composure regardless of external circumstances. The formal introductions began with Lord Chamberlain presenting General Mitchell to various palace officials. The American delegation seemed impressed by the grandeur of their surroundings and the precision with which the ceremony unfolded. Photographers from both nations captured moments that would appear in military publications and diplomatic records. As the group moved through the initial reception, McKenna noticed General Mitchell's attention wandering from the formal presentations. The general's eyes seemed drawn to the ornate architecture, the historical significance of the location, and particularly to the guards stationed throughout the area. His gaze lingered on McKenna's position, studying the young guardsmen with what appeared to be professional curiosity. The morning progressed according to schedule, with tours of selected castle areas, briefings on historical significance, and discussions about military traditions shared between British and American forces. McKenna remained at his post, occasionally hearing fragments of conversation as groups passed his location. The general's voice carried authority and confidence, befitting someone accustomed to being the highest-ranking person in most rooms. During a brief pause in the formal proceedings, McKenna observed General Mitchell separating from the main group. The general approached several staff members with questions about palace operations, security procedures, and the role of the various guards stationed throughout the grounds. His inquiries seemed genuine, reflecting professional interest rather than casual curiosity. Captain Williams appeared periodically to check on his guards, ensuring everyone maintained proper bearing throughout the extended ceremony. He exchanged brief words with palace security personnel and diplomatic escorts, coordinating movements and timing for the various scheduled events. McKenna caught his captain's eye during one such exchange, receiving a subtle nod of approval. The delegation's tour continued through various sections of the castle, with explanations of historical significance and current operational procedures. McKenna could hear the American officials expressing appreciation for the traditions maintained at the royal residence and the professionalism displayed by all personnel involved in the visit. As midday approached, the formal lunch was scheduled to begin in the castle's state dining room. This would provide an opportunity for more informal conversation between the British and American delegations, discussing matters of mutual military interest and strengthening diplomatic relationships between the nations. General Mitchell, however, seemed more interested in the operational aspects of the castle than the ceremonial elements of the visit. During breaks in the official program, he continued asking detailed questions about security procedures, guard rotations, and the specific responsibilities of various personnel. His military background made him naturally curious about how such a complex operation functioned on a daily basis. McKenna noticed the general's attention returning to his position several times throughout the morning. Each glance seemed more evaluative, as if the general was forming opinions about the effectiveness or necessity of the ceremonial guards. The intensity of this scrutiny made McKenna even more conscious of maintaining perfect posture and bearing. The autumn weather remained pleasant, with gentle breezes occasionally stirring the plumes on the guards' ceremonial hats. The castle grounds bustled with activity as staff members prepared for the afternoon portions of the visit, which would include meetings with senior British military officials and tours of facilities not normally accessible to visitors. As the lunch hour approached, McKenna anticipated the temporary relief that would allow him to rest and refresh before resuming his duties. The morning had passed without incident, and the diplomatic proceedings appeared to be unfolding successfully. Both delegations seemed pleased with the progress of discussions and the warmth of the welcome provided by their British hosts. Palace staff moved efficiently through their assigned tasks, ensuring that every aspect of the visit met the exacting standards expected for such occasions. The coordination between military personnel, diplomatic officials, and palace staff demonstrated the experience gained through years of hosting similar events for dignitaries from around the world. General Mitchell's questions about operational procedures continued throughout the morning, revealing a thorough understanding of military organization and genuine interest in comparing American and British approaches to similar challenges. His colleagues seemed accustomed to his detailed inquiries and his tendency to focus on practical rather than purely ceremonial aspects of any situation. The formal lunch provided an opportunity for more substantive discussions about military cooperation, shared strategic interests, and ongoing collaborative efforts between British and American forces. These conversations would form the foundation for agreements and understandings that would influence future joint operations and training exercises. McKenna remained at his post as the various groups moved through their scheduled activities. His position provided an excellent vantage point for observing the interaction between different delegations and the smooth operation of palace protocols. The morning had reinforced his appreciation for the complexity involved in hosting such significant diplomatic events. The historical significance of Windsor Castle added gravitas to the proceedings, with its ancient walls bearing witness to centuries of similar gatherings between rulers, diplomats, and military leaders. The current visit represented a continuation of traditions stretching back through generations of Anglo-American cooperation and friendship. As the formal lunch concluded, McKenna prepared for the afternoon portion of his duties. The visit schedule included additional tours, meetings with military advisors, and presentations about current operational priorities for both nations. His role would continue to be maintaining ceremonial presence while remaining alert to any security considerations. The success of the morning's events boded well for the remainder of the visit. Both delegations appeared satisfied with the progress of their discussions and the quality of hospitality provided. The afternoon would bring new opportunities for strengthening relationships and advancing shared objectives between the allied nations. General Mitchell emerged from the lunch looking thoughtful, his conversations with British military officials having apparently provided valuable insights into different approaches to common challenges. His entourage gathered around him as preparations began for the next phase of the visit, which would include more detailed technical discussions and site visits to operational facilities. The general's attention once again turned toward McKenna's position, this time with what appeared to be increased interest. His previous glances had been casual observations, but now his focus seemed more deliberate, as if he was contemplating something specific about the ceremonial guard duties he had been observing throughout the morning. Palace security personnel maintained their discreet presence throughout the grounds, coordinating with American security details to ensure comprehensive protection for all participants. The seamless integration of different security protocols demonstrated the professionalism that had been developed through years of hosting international delegations at royal residences. The afternoon sun began to cast different shadows across the courtyard as activities resumed following the lunch break. McKenna adjusted his grip on his ceremonial rifle and reset his stance, preparing for what would likely be several more hours of maintaining his ceremonial duties while the diplomatic proceedings continued around him. The success of international visits like this one depended on countless details being executed flawlessly by dozens of personnel working in coordination. From the guards maintaining ceremonial presence to the staff coordinating logistics, everyone played essential roles in creating the atmosphere of dignity and respect appropriate for such occasions. McKenna's training had prepared him for exactly these situations, where maintaining proper military bearing became part of the diplomatic message being conveyed to visiting dignitaries. His appearance and conduct reflected not only on himself and his unit, but on the broader reputation of British military professionalism and the respect accorded to visiting allies. The Coldstream Guards had a distinguished history of providing ceremonial duties at royal residences while maintaining their effectiveness as active military units. This dual role required soldiers who could seamlessly transition between ceremonial functions and operational readiness, understanding that both aspects of their service contributed to national security and international relationships. As the afternoon activities began, McKenna noticed General Mitchell's delegation preparing for the next phase of their visit. The general's interest in operational procedures and military protocols suggested that the afternoon discussions would focus on practical matters of mutual interest rather than purely ceremonial considerations. The autumn weather continued to cooperate with the outdoor portions of the visit, providing ideal conditions for the various tours and presentations scheduled throughout the day. The pleasant atmosphere seemed to enhance the positive tone of the diplomatic exchanges and the effectiveness of the relationship-building activities. McKenna's position allowed him to observe the natural flow of conversation and interaction between the British and American delegations. The initial formality of the morning had given way to more relaxed exchanges, suggesting that the visit was successfully accomplishing its objectives of strengthening cooperation and understanding between the allied nations. The general's questions about guard procedures and palace security had become more frequent and detailed as the visit progressed. His military background clearly made him interested in understanding how different organizations approached similar challenges, and the ceremonial aspects of British military tradition seemed to fascinate him from a professional perspective. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the ancient stones of Windsor Castle, the stage was being set for events that would test McKenna's training, composure, and understanding of his duties in ways that no amount of preparation could have fully anticipated. The convergence of military traditions, diplomatic protocol, and individual personalities was about to create a situation that would be remembered long after the formal visit concluded.